along. There'll be no more sobbing when he starts throbbing his own sweet song. Wake up, you sleepyheads, get up, get out of bed, cheer up the sun.
The Red Robin podcast is powered by Budget Tyres Auto Centre, the only car specialist trusted by supporters, players and club officials. Head down to Leeds Road and check them out for all your motoring needs. Hello and welcome East Hull. The Robins are heading to Wembley. Before then, we have another date with the Warriors, and head coach Willie Peters has rung the changes with 3 loan signings and a raft of youngsters set to take on Wigan in what is set to be a wet and windy Friday evening at the DW Stadium. Joining me this week is Scott Solway and Dan Craft. And we're going to start with Scott because Dan's not ready to join us just yet. So, Scott, I mean, Challenge Cup final, it's almost like Super League's peeled into insignificance a little bit, hasn't it? But, we can't take the eye off the prize almost, Scott, because Friday is an important game yet. Head coach Willie Peters has made a number of changes, which is probably quite understandable in the circumstances.
Yeah, I think it has to be. He's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, isn't he, really, to a certain extent. He's got to protect the players that we need to play at Wembley, but on the same understanding, he's got to try and put as best of a competitive team out as he can. I'm not a believer in that we deliberately throw the game, but when you look at the 21-man squad, it is full of young kids and loans, and yeah, there's a couple of bit of experience in there in Matty Stoughton, Jim Kynose, Rowan Milnes. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're the 3 players that don't make the cut as well. I wouldn't be surprised at all. So it might be just that his name, Kynose, Milnes, Aiden, people like that, just as part of the squad to fulfil the 21, and they might not make it. But I'm sure that whichever team go out there at Wigan on Friday night, they'll wear the shirt with pride. Yeah, that might, stranger things have happened. You never know. They might roll up and just give them a game. But if we're being realistic, it's more like just fulfilling a fixture, really, I think, just to make sure that we can put a competitive team out. And with the reserves playing as well prior to that, his hands are tied, really, aren't they? The reserves have been promoted to the first team, which means that probably the under-16s and under-18s are going to be playing for the reserves. So I think Willie's hands are tied to a certain extent, but is it the right thing to do? I think it is. But looking at history, from what I've read and bits I've picked up, teams that have rested players for a Wembley final haven't gone on to be too successful at Wembley. So it's quite interesting because I think Leeds are going to have to go with a full squad near enough on Sunday at Leeds, I think, because they don't have a reserves or an academy. So I don't think they have much choice in fielding a majority of their first team squad. Will that benefit us or will it benefit them? I don't know. We'll find out.
Well, Scott, we'll talk a lot more about the Wigan game later on in the podcast. But I mean, we almost forget, don't we, that Rovers played Castleford last week. That seems to have fallen into the backdrop of the Challenge Cup final, and obviously this is a short game against Wigan. And to be fair, Scott, it was quite a comprehensive victory in the end, wasn't it? And there's some supporters even then clamouring for Willie Peters to make changes in, and that was 2 weeks ahead of the final. But in the end, 34 points to 16, the Robins were out victorious. Although there was times where you felt Rovers probably weren't at the best, it was still quite a comprehensive victory in the end.
Yeah, I think that the result was never in doubt. It went with the full squad. I think it was interesting that he did that. I mean, I think with 2 weeks prior to a final, you would do that anyway. I thought the hookers played really, really well. I think Andy last mentioned that Matt Parcell and Jeslerton ran his team ragged. Some nice tries scored. I don't think we really got out of second or third gear, if we're being honest. I think we had lots more to go. And considering Cass hadn't played the week before and they'd had that week off, I probably expected more from Cass, really, considering the scrapping for the lives. But I think it was a game Rovers we seemed to win without really getting out of third gear. And I think we did enough to win. It could have been a bigger margin than that, but we did okay, didn't we? 34-16, a convincing win. It could have been 40. If we'd have taken more of our chances and been a bit more composed, we could have had 40, 50 points, I think. So, yeah, steady game to win. Disappointed with Cass, considering the scrapping for the lives. But you can only beat what's in front of you on the day, and that Rovers did that convincingly last Friday.
Dan, good evening. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. It's funny there, Scott just said about at one point. It looked like it was going to put a number of points on them. And when you look at the way we're racing to a 16-0 lead after 22 minutes, I mean, I was thinking this is going to be 50, 60 points. Rovers seemed to set the foot off the gas. I suppose overall, Dan, the most disappointing aspect of that performance was them few sloppy tries, what we let in, because there's no mistake. I mean, Castleford were pretty poor, weren't they? I mean, they didn't really deserve to come away with the 16 points what they did in the end.
No, like you say, John, I think we took foot off gas, didn't we, in first half, towards the end of it. I do think we could have run away with it. We were finding gaps. Parcell terrorised him, didn't he? He was finding gaps in the line every time he got the ball, straight from dummy half. He was away, wasn't he? It was disappointing to concede a couple of tries, but you do feel like come out second half, they sort of must have got together at half time and said, "Come on, lads, let's just blow these away." We never really, I think I tweeted it, we never really had to go out of second gear, did we? It was a game that you're looking at their squad. We always should have won it. We was always going to win it probably, but we thought probably at half time the scoreline probably flattered them, didn't it? Looking at it.
Yeah, and to be fair, right, Dan, because at half time, Willie Peters must have said something, because it was the Robin Scott who went in first for another try just after half time. Minchella, and then Batchelor goes in, and then Castleford get the yellow card on 55 minutes. Ethan Ryan scores during that, and with a third of the game to go, 34 points to 10, it ended up being a bit of a procession at the end. And credit to Castleford. I mean, I don't think they really gave up, but I think it was either the first or second try, Scott, and I saw some of the Castleford players leaning on the posts after they scored a try, and you think, hang on, this isn't a side that should give us any worries. And do you know what, Scott? I mean, credit to the Robins, because we've seen so many times before, haven't we, sort of after the Lord Mayor's Parade, where quite easily, the Rovers could have lost that game. They turned in a really professional performance, and in reality, I dare say we couldn't have asked for anything more from the Robins.
I think the main thing was, if you'd have asked Willie Peters before kick-off, it'd be just to take the 2 points. But it was a very professional performance, I think, as well. Certainly coming off the back of a tough semi-final. It was a tough game, that Wigan game. I know the euphoria of the golden point and the drop goal, and I'm sure the players were celebrating long into the Sunday night. But then you're always thinking of the next game, and you do come unstuck sometimes. Your next game, it's like after the Lord Mayor shows you mentioned there, Jono. Sometimes you just you're just lacking a bit of energy, lacking a bit of firepower, and it's a bit lethargic and a bit ploddy. But I just thought we worked very professional in what we did. As I say, we can only beat what's in front of you. I was really disappointed with Cass, considering they're a team fighting for their lives. But Rovers were great, I thought. Some of the tries we scored and the way we executed them was fantastic. I think Rhys Kennedy probably had his best game in a Rovers shirt. Some argued he played well in the semi. He did, but I thought he was great against Cass. And we just seem to have a few players now that are just coming into a bit of form as well, which is a blessing, really, isn't it? We've got a few players now coming, just hitting a bit of form, a rich vein of form. Players who maybe have been struggling a little bit, and we've mentioned before players like Rhys Kennedy who probably had a little bit of abuse, maybe undeservedly earlier on in the season, but he's now coming into a bit of form, and we're finding the real player Rhys Kennedy was, and why he turned out so many times for Brisbane like he did. You don't play for Brisbane as many times as he did if you're not very good, do you? So, we're doing that.
And I suppose the thing is, down with Rhys Kennedy, I mean, it's funny because he got named man of the match, where if you look at stats-wise, it was probably George King who was a top-performing prop on the day. And we know what George King brings to the side, of course we do. But what you suggest is it's not necessarily the stats for Rhys Kennedy, it's the impact. It's what he does during them carries. It's what he does with the offloads. And there's no doubt that over the last few weeks, Dan, that Rhys Kennedy has really upped his game. And yeah, he might have been a bit of a slow burner, and maybe it took a bit of him time to adapt. But now we're starting to see the best of Rhys Kennedy. He's almost like a new signing, isn't he? The impact, what he's having on the side.
Yeah, at the start of the season, he was just... I don't know if he was just trying a bit too hard to win over the fans. Everything he was doing, he was looking for the offloads that weren't there. He was just... but his fitness seems to have improved. At the start of the season, he was only managing about 10, 15 minutes, whether or not Willie Peters was just hooking him because he wasn't playing that well. But he's been putting in some big minutes, and at the end of his stint, even the fans are clapping him off because he's putting a good effort. The thing that was telling for me was when he got awarded man of the match. You look over, he was sat on the bench at that point, 5 minutes to go, and everyone on the bench was stood up, giving him a pat on the back. And it made me wonder, obviously he was getting a bit of stick on Twitter. They say that players don't look at Twitter, but they obviously do, don't they? You just wonder if he was having a hard time settling in, and it's the lads getting behind him now that he's finally coming into his own. I think last 3 games, everybody's been saying he's one of the best players out on the pitch for us.
Yeah.
In terms of his work rate, which is all we can ask. And we know he's not he's never going to be the best prop in the world, is he? We know that, but it's his work rate. He's up there with George King. Like you say, George King is probably, stats say he was man of the match, but it's sad, isn't it? You just come to expect it from King, and anything less than that, and you get disappointed with him.
Yeah, George King has definitely set the bar, not necessarily for every other forward, but for himself. So we judge him maybe by a higher standard than we do to other props. But Scott, I mean, for me, Rhys Kennedy, he plays. He plays. He's got minutes on the pitch, and when people compare him to other forwards and forwards right in the past, etc., do you know what? He's on the pitch. He's playing week in, week out, and for your forwards, I mean, that's what you want. That's what you want for your big money moves. I mean, we're not privy to know what contract he's on, but he gets on the pitch and he plays almost week in, week out. I think he's played nearly every game. I'm trying to think. I think he might have missed a couple of games, if one at most. But he plays, and now he's bearing the fruits of his labour by the performances that he's putting in.
He's knuckled down. I think, like Dan says, he was doing smaller minutes when he first arrived, and we're getting 10, 15 minutes stints out of him, and we're thinking, hang on, this is an overseas quota spot here. You've got to get more out of your overseas players. As you just said, Jono, we don't know what contracts these players are on, but they're not coming over from Australia for peanuts. So you've got to get as much out of them as you can and make sure that everything that they give is worth every penny, that you're paying them. And we've seen that with Rhys now. I think he's fantastic. I agree with Dan. He was trying a little bit too hard at the start of the season. He was trying stupid offloads, wasn't he? And the stupid plays that just weren't on at the start of the season. But now he just seems to take the ball. I'll carry the ball. I'll drive it in. I'll do my job, and I'll set the groundwork for the next couple of tackles. And that's what he should be doing. That's his job, I think. It's a bit like George King. No nonsense. Take the ball in, drive it in, set the groundwork, and build it for the next 2 or 3 tackles in the set. And I would say, along with George King, as you said, George King sets the bar. He sets the bar for himself, as you've said. But I think Rhys is matching George King now. Is right up there with him. He's playing fantastically well. Good on him, because he's done well. I think he admitted himself in an interview, didn't he? I think it might have been with Joe and the whole Daily Mail recently that the colder weather and it's not really improved, has it, to be fair? But the colder weather.
Ironic, he's playing better, and the summer's no different to the winter.
Yeah. I think he mentioned himself that at the start of the season with the cold weather and, we all had hats and gloves on. He struggled with that coming from Brisbane. But so the slightly warm weather's benefited him. But he's also got to take the ball by the horns as a player as well. And he's certainly done that. He's in my 17 every week, without a doubt.
Yeah, and Dan, for me, it became more apparent than ever under the Tony Smith era that your props, you can't have 4 George Kings, you can't have 4 Matty Staughtons, you can't have 4 Rhys Kennedys, you can't have 4 𝗟𝗡𝗄𝗎s. You need to have a range of props who do different things at different times for the side. And Rhys Kennedy falls into that bracket in terms of being a different type of player to the other ones. And probably unfairly, we compare, because George King does so much so consistently, and he's a 8 out of 10 every game. He's who we compare him to. But there's no doubt that Rhys Kennedy, what he does in his game is different to what George King does, and it benefits the Robins at different times. And it's good to see the Robins having a range of forwards. And I wonder, God, where would be if 𝗟𝗡𝗄𝗎 was still playing now as well? Because coming into this sort of third part of the season, would be really rich in the forwards if he was still fit.
Yeah, it's probably one of the good things that Tony Smith did when he did a lot of good things, in fairness to him, but he adapted us to the modern game. If you look at like a Lee Radford coach side, he just liked the big players. Like you look at his old side, where he had 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗏𝗧 up there and 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗏𝗧𝗏. He likes big lads, didn't he?
Well, you only have to look at Castleford to see what trouble they are right now.
𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗧, it just wasn't. It's not the modern game, is it? It might have worked 10, 15 years ago, but with all the interchanges now, you need to be fit. Like you can have 𝗓𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧, someone like that, a big lump, but he ain't going to put in your 20, 25 minute stints, as he just comes on wrecking ball for 10 minutes. Well, I think we've found that balance now, haven't we? Especially with, like you say, Sue, Kennedy, Staunton, King, they seem to be our starting props at the minute, don't they? Well, not at the minute with Sue, but you know what I mean. We seem to have found that balance. It's the stamina now of a prop. Gone are the days where you big beer belly, big barrel that you can't tackle. You still see in Championship and that, don't you? But it's gone are the days of that. You have to be quite agile to be a prop, bit more mobile now, don't you? Rather than just a big 20-stone lump.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, most of the East Stand could probably play that position if that was still the case.
I'm getting that way, yeah. I'm moving into the forwards the way I'm going.
It's funny though, mate, because it's not often a prop leads the meters made. I mean, George King, 156 meters he made against Castleford, which was more than any other player. Mikey Lewis was second with 143 meters. Ethan Ryan was third with 142. Carries wise, Mikey Lewis had ball in hand the most, 22 carries. George King, 19 carries. So it shows what an impact George King. And we say long live the King, don't we? Because it almost feels like when he doesn't play, he's such a, like we've already said, he's such a mainstay in the side that when he doesn't play, it's unfathomable, really. We don't know quite what to make of it when he's not in the side. But credit to Reece Kennedy, I think he was deserving of the man and match. Another player who excelled and he was named in the team of the week, Scott, was Elliot Minchella. And what a return to the side he's made. I mean, by all accounts, coming into the semi-final earlier than expected because of injury. He then comes and backs that up with a fantastic performance in Castleford. And it's funny. He glided into the side, but that's how he plays. He just glides around. I think Elliot Minchella's the greatest credit you could pay to him is that you don't almost notice he's in the side sometimes, but you notice when he's not.
I think we mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Jono, that he does all that dirty work in the middle of the pitch as well. Him and Dean Hadley between them do a lot of that. And you're right, sometimes he just gets on with his job. He's a great leader. Again, very much like George King, he's 8 out of 10 every week. He does his job. He's a leader in the middle of that park. He'll take the ball in. He'll tackle all day for you. And you're right, when he's not in the team, you see there's something missing. There's something missing in the team when Elliot's not there. But when he's there, sometimes you're right. Sometimes you don't even notice that he's there. He's just doing his job. And I think we mentioned the other week when James was on about like Tom Opperchick, who just does his job as a centre. Minnie does that as well, and he's a great leader. And I think the other forwards look up to him as well and say, if you look at his work rate, his defence rate, the amount of tackles that he makes, and all the dirty work that he does in and around the ruck and things like that, you certainly know when he's not on the pitch. And to come back, I'm hearing that he's still carrying this neck injury that he got a couple of weeks ago, and he's playing through it. So hopefully it can't be too bad. Perfect decision to rest him this week against Wigan, back for the final hopefully. But whether he's playing through a pain barrier or what, I don't know. But this was a 2 to 6 week injury, and he was back after 2. So, and for all the work that he does, I just hope that it don't bother him come Wembley time. I think resting him this week will certainly be beneficial to him, as it will all the other players. But for him to turn out and keep putting the performances in that he did against Wigan in the semi and Cass on Friday, with potentially still a neck injury, is quite phenomenal, really. He again is another player that's in your first 13. He's always your 13. If he's fit, he's your 13, isn't he? All the time, every week.
Yeah, and Dan, I'll come to you very shortly. I mean, just On 𝗕𝗂𝗻𝗁, Scott, I mean, I'm not a rugby league aficionado by any stretch of imagination, a historian of the game. But for me, he seems to be the classic loose forward, the player who's got a little bit of everything. He's got the pay. I mean, the try he scored, he came in like a steam train, didn't he?
Yeah.
Absolutely steamed in there for it. But he's got the skill with ball in hand. He's got the aggressiveness when he's making the tackles. He's got the know-how to be in the right position at the right times. And you know, when I look at some of the loose forwards in the past, and you're talking about the great ones, I mean, Gary Schofield, etc. You know, great players. And for me, 𝗕𝗂𝗻𝗁, he seems to be someone who could have that ability to be one of the greats. I think I really do think that about him.
I think the olden day loose forward back in the day were probably slightly different in today's loose forwards. I don't think they did as much, perhaps didn't do as much defending as the loose forwards do nowadays. I mean, Elliott spends a lot of time in the middle of the pitch. I remember when 𝗕𝗓𝗗𝗏 moved from full back into standoff, and then he went to loose forward. Dave was one of the best players that ever played for Rovers. You know, fantastic ball handler at loose 13. If you in the loose forward. If you see when Rovers played Cass in the Premiership final, he was putting players through gaps and stuff like that. I don't know whether Minnie's that kind of player, but he's certainly got that in him, hasn't he? As you say, the ball handling skills. He's got a great offload. He'll take the ball in all day. He'll tackle all day for you. He's a great all-rounder. I'm not even sure how old he is. Is he 26 this year? Is he? I mean, he's probably...
He's not even that old, is he, Dan? I think he's
27 years. Yeah.
Is he? So he's coming into the prime, isn't he, of his career?
I'm not a stat. I just googled it now. I was talking.
You mean
so we are getting birthday card?
Sorry,
you're not sending in birthday cards. You haven't got all the players' dates of birth ready.
Well, that's something we won't go into.
But I guess he is. Yeah, if he's 27, we've got him in his prime, then haven't we? It should just be coming into his own now, and that probably is the reason why, when he doesn't play, we miss him so much. It would be one of the first names on the team sheet every week.
Yeah, and Dan, I mean, a player who's age-wise probably not in his prime yet, but someone who is fulfilling his potential at the moment is Mikey Lewis, isn't it? The last couple of games in that fullback role, what a revelation he's been, and whether it's because he's thriving off the ability to have the ball in hand more, and I think running, I think he's a running player, and he likes to run. And there's no doubt, is he at fullback, you get the opportunity to run into space, etc. You only have to look at. I mean, 11 tackle busts he made against Castleford, the most out of any player. Normally, SKD wins that hands down every week, but it was Mikey Lewis who came up with 11. Second top meters made, most carries. He seems to be thriving in that fullback role.
Yeah, just going to throw it out there. I've been saying for quite a few weeks when Coot retired, he's the answer. Mikey Lewis is a fullback. You look at how he plays. He likes to attack the line. You know, he's got that space now at fullback to do that. Whereas when he's in the halves, especially with Rowan Milnes, no disrespect to Rowan, but the teams know that Mikey Lewis is where everything's going to go through. So they're targeting him. He doesn't have that space on the ball like he when he was an entity when he was first sort of coming on the scene. Everyone knows Mikey Lewis now is a let's close down and close Rovers down. Whereas when he's at fullback, he's got that space to sort of assess the line, and you can see he was sort of the way he was running with the ball. He was looking for the gap, whereas he wouldn't usually have that space to do that when he's in the halves. And the other thing you sort of look at as well is when we're pushing up, he's always on the edge, on the shoulder of that Parcells, 𝗕𝗓𝗏𝗏, always looking for that second ball. It is like having another half but he was solid under the high ball as well, wasn't he? So I think he's got all the makings of fullback. You look at someone like Sam Tompkins. He started his career in the halves, didn't he? He was a standoff.
Yeah, it's a great comparison. It is a really great comparison. And you know, Scott, when you look at 𝗕𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏, he's apparently being lined up to play fullback. If you read all what Willie Peters has said, you know, you almost say, well, why would you? A player who's in the NRL playing every single week at centre, why do we need to convert him to a fullback when you've got potentially a player who could line up? I mean, also, it does pose a question at the end of the season, doesn't it? Because Schneider we've only gotten to the end of the season. Does he earn a new deal? If he does earn a new deal and Abdul becomes fit, then you've got Abdul, Lewis, Milnes, Schneider. Well, 4 don't go into 2, do they? So is this an opportunity to be able to cater for them? And I like watching Lewis at fullback because he just seems to have the freedom to play the way he wants to play, and when he comes into the line as well, like when Coop played, he is that offensive player who's got the ability to either score a try himself or he's got the ability to make the offload, make the pass. And at the moment, and it's only 2 games, don't get me wrong, but he does seem to be sort of moving into that fullback role quite astutely.
I think what benefits him as well is they don't have to do all that defending. You know, when he's up in the line and having to teams target him, teams run at him, the big lads are running at him. Don't get me wrong, he throws his body on the line every tackle, does Mikey. But I think he might be at the highest missed tackle count for Rovers this season, purely down to the fact that the big lads were throwing himself at him. When you take him out of that equation and put him at fullback, well, he's fresh for the full 80 minutes then. He's not been run over the top of by the 6'4" prop. So he's got all the time in the world, you know, to take the high ball and come out, join the line and link in and bring other players into play. I agree. I think his natural position going forward is a fullback. Now, whether Hiku would go into the centres but I think Hiku, as you say, has been signed to play the fullback role to replace Coop. But the way Mike is, again, as you said, it's only 2 games, but the way Mike is playing at fullback at the moment, it seems a natural transition for him just to drop into that position. And the fact he doesn't have to do all that defending in the line on the edges, it keeps him fresh for the full 80 minutes. And, you know, when teams are tiring and they're a bit worn down, he's a live wire. You know, you give him the ball in open field, you know, it'll cause all sorts of damage over 80 minutes, I think. So I think it's the way forward. But whether Willie sees that, I don't know. But on the first 2 games that he's played there, it looks sensational. And I think it's a great option for Mikey going forward, without a doubt.
Yeah, Michael Morton watching on YouTube, he makes a great point. He says Mikey Lewis will run riot in the open space at Wembley. Of course, it's a huge pitch at Wembley, as we found out in 2015. Unfortunately, it's a big old pitch. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see where Mikey Lewis does line up for the Challenge Cup final. While we're talking about imports, Dan, and players for next season, who's playing where? Oliver Gildart, surprised to see him lining up for the Lee Leopards for the remainder of the season?
Yeah, it's not something I particularly agree with, but I think listening to Willie Peters, and he said that he knew it was going to happen, but the club has spoken to him, and I think they've got a gentleman's agreement with Lee that he can't play. I don't think he can play in the cup final, can he? He's cup tied because you have to be registered before the semi, and I don't know if he can play against us.
Well, I'm going to find out, Dan, because Derek Beaumont is joining me next week for the podcast. I've spoke to him, I've texted him, and he said 100% he's coming on. I'll ask him the question: have they got a deal in play? I mean, it'd be funny if they have got a deal in place, because by all rights, Rovers can't claim any ownership of him, can they? Until 1st of November when his contract kicks in. So I'll be very surprised if that does happen, but nothing surprises you in rugby league anymore, does it?
No, and I'm sure they won't have just left it with him, will they? They'll have been a word in his ear. If you're going to do this, here's the ground rules. But the one it's just something I've heard. Well-respected journalist, he's not usually far wider than Mark. He seems to think Anthony Milford has been targeted for next season from Dolphins. We're looking at him as a marquee signing, so that could be he's usually not far wrong. He's the fellow I'm on about, so that could be an answer in the halves, couldn't it? With Abdul, somebody said Milnes is looking at Leeds for next season, so it could be a number we're losing.
Yeah, I mean Scott. I mean someone like Milford. I mean, we're in that market now, aren't we? We saw that with Frizell from Newcastle. You know, the offer was on the table. I know he's just he signed a new deal at Newcastle to remain there, but it shows you what ballpark we're playing in now in terms of bringing players in. And Lakin said that they're quite happy to go down the marquee route, which means that money's there. This Gildart deal, you get the sense. I watched Willie Peters' press conference and he was questioned about it. You get the sense, reading between the lines, he's not that happy about it. More to the point, because I think Rovers won't offer the opportunity to sign him. It seems to be a deal done behind Rovers' back, almost.
I think Willie said when it was spoken about a few weeks back, could we bring 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗴𝗏 and Gildart over early when we had our major injury crisis? 𝗕𝗂𝗱𝗏 was probably a no-no due to him being a quartered place, but with Gildart being English and British, he was the option that we could have probably brought in earlier. But I think Willie said to him, it's down to the player. If the player wants to come early, we might be able to take him early. For them to go and sign for Lee for the remainder of the season, I don't understand it whatsoever. I really can't get my head around it. Especially, surely he must have said, it clearly hasn't from what I can make up, but you make contact with your club and say, look, I'm willing to come over now. Do you want to take me? Or alternatively, I can join somebody else for the remainder of the fixtures of the season.
Well, you just think it's courtesy, wouldn't you? You just think his agent will go, right, first dibs, look, he's open to a move back home early. Do you fancy him? Now, I know there's been some talk about the salary cap, i.e. that the deal he's on at the moment and what Lee were able to pay him to the end of the season is something we couldn't match because we couldn't get him in under the cap. I don't know how true that is because obviously 𝗡𝓸𝓫𝓲𝓷𝓼 retired, so that's freed up a bit of money. But Willie Peters said, well, we haven't even had the conversation about him coming over, which it just seems a bit. The whole scenario just seems a little bit strange, doesn't it? It doesn't sit for a lot of supporters. I mean, a lot of supporters I've seen on social media said could not give a toss, not bothered one bit. He's not our player till November, so I don't care what he does. A lot of people are thinking, well, it seems a bit fishy. I mean, let's not forget, he's still got the opportunity to play against us. I know Dan said whether there's a gentleman's agreement where he plays or not. But we could still meet Lee in the playoffs as well. Now, that throws up another curveball, and we're all talking ifs and buts here, and we don't know what's going to happen. But it just, like I said, it just seems a bit of a weird one.
It's just that Rovers didn't seem to know anything about it whatsoever. That, to me, just doesn't sit right. Not from Oliver Gildart perspective, from his agent perspective, and from a Lee Leopard's perspective. I just think there's something doesn't sit right there with me. We know he's got the right to play for who he wants until November, until he becomes a Robin. But it's common decency and courtesy for me to contact the club you're going to join in November and say, look, this is what's happening. I can come over, and if you've got space for me, I can join you. This is the club I'm going to be playing for the next 3 years. So do you want to take me early? But to have from what I can make on, there's been no contact with Rovers whatsoever. The first thing they know is that Oliver Gildart is Sam Lee. That just doesn't sit right with me whatsoever. Even though he's got the right to do that, he hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't broken any rules. Neither is his agent and neither of Lee. But it doesn't sit right with me that he hasn't spoke to Rovers first. There's something wrong with that.
No, and I think and that's it. Like said Dan, Willie Peters' press conference, really, the sentence from Willie Peters would have been, yeah, we was offered him, but for us it financially wasn't right at the time. We're glad that he's coming over to England. We wish him all the best, and I'm sure when he comes back, when he comes for the Robins, he'll be fit and ready to go. But there was none of that, was there? It was just no, we've not spoken to him, we haven't been offered him, and that was it. And I mean, some people have said, well, he's a Wigan lad. He's going over to Lee. Is it an opportunity to get his head turned and maybe renegade on the deal he's signed for the Robins? I mean, time will tell, I suppose, won't it?
Yeah, I don't think that'll happen. I think he's committed to us from end of the season. I think you watch the NRL, he's been getting a lot of stick, and he's not really that well thought of over there for one reason.
Well, if you watch the NRL this season, Dan, you won't have seen him.
He hasn't played. He's played once or twice for Dolphins, has he?
I don't think he's played once, has he?
Is he not?
No.
But even when he was at West Tigers, he wasn't really that well thought of. You just type in Gildart, it was just a torrent of get him back. Please just send him back to England. But I don't read too much into that. But I think it'd be interesting if you speak to Derek next week. He's don't usually he don't usually hide behind things, does he? Will probably tell you straight how it went. It's whether or not, if you look at their squad, I think Scott mentioned it earlier about resting players. They don't have a lot of players.
No.
They've done well with injuries. I think if they'd have got injuries this season, they'd be struggling. But
Yeah.
they've done well,
and that has been the key to their success, hasn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
it was a few weeks ago when I saw Sky put the stat up where teams who've got the most players who've played the most games, and Lee were up there with like 10 or 12, 11 players have played every single game this season, which is almost unheard of. And to be fair, Lee, it's going to be really interesting to see what squad they announce for the game against Leeds, because they don't have a reserve side. They don't have an academy side. So they're not exactly blessed with any depth in the squad. And I wonder now if there's a bit of panic going on.
The cap space has come from then, isn't it? They don't have the numbers in depth. That's where the cap space has come from for Gildart, isn't it? That's where you're going to look at it. Yeah.
Right, some more club news. Oliver Gildart, of course, signed for Lee. The 3G pitch that has been much heralded at Craven Park, the planning permission's been approved for that. That is subject to obtaining the necessary funding to build it. So we hope to have some news on that very soon. And congratulations to the women's side, who beat Stanley to lift the League Cup. They won 22 points to 6. What a fantastic 12 months it's been for them, and I know there's been lots of hard work going into making sure that they're the best they can be. So congratulations to them. I'd love to get, if anyone's listening, you follow the women's side, or you've got an opinion on the women's side and you want to come on the podcast, please let me know. I'd love to get you on and give some more coverage to the work that they're doing, because I know they're a fantastic group and they deserve every success that they're getting, and it's credit to Rovers for bringing them into the fold and treating them, from the community, the foundation side, and bringing them into the actual club and the way they look after them. So hopefully this is the start of more success to come, because it is well deserved. And a little rumour I saw as well, Scott, Justin Morgan in the running for the Warrington job. Every time a Super League job comes up at the moment, he seems to be getting linked with it, which makes me wonder if he's hankering on a return to the Super League.
It's been a mention every time a job comes available in Super League. Justin Morgan's name gets bandied about. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether he'd be open to a move back to Super League. I don't know. And certainly Cass is only 40 minutes up the road. He's still got all his friends in Hull, so maybe it fits him, maybe it suits him. I know Justin Holbrook's name's been bandied about, more likely potentially Warrington, but I think they're probably going to go with an Aussie coach or New Zealand coach down the road now. I think if they're going to stay up, they're going to need somebody in pretty quick, I guess, because Wakey seem to have just hit a little bit of form now and seem to be picking up a few results here and there. And I know they play each other soon, don't they, Wakey and Cass, a couple of weeks' time. But Justin Morgan, would he be a good fit for Cass? Maybe, yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I suppose, Dan, who is a good fit for Cass or Wakefield? I mean, Warrington, sorry, because Warrington, especially, Dan. I mean, there seems to be a bit of a car crash club, don't they? They won Super League in April when there was parading around Catalans with Daryl Powell getting his pictures with all the fans, and there was walking around like they'd won the trophy. Well, they just don't seem to be able to get over the line, do they? And the amount of investment, the amount of money that goes into that club, into that side, for what they turn out at the moment, they're a bit of an anomaly, really, aren't they? They're a strange old club.
Well, it's one of you look at their team on paper and you sort of think, is it an example of players forcing the coach out? I think they're rotten. As a club, they're rotten. I feel for the fans in a way, because they are quite well supported, aren't they? But they don't just there just seems to be a culture there that's not. It's probably not too dissimilar to what ours was back in the days of Albert Kelly in 2015, the cup final year. I think that masked what we had within the club, where it was a bit of a bad culture. And I think that's what Warrington and Castleford have got at the present. That's why they're struggling. I mean, from what I've heard with Cass, I think it's just the people that are there don't care. The players that are there don't seem to care. They're just happy just to plod along and pick up a wage. Whereas the Wakey players and that have started to knuckle down, aren't they? The big thing for Wakey in the relegation battle, going off off on a tangent from Warrington is that they brought in 𝗕𝗓𝗏𝗧, and I think he just loves the club, loves the place, doesn't he? And I think he must have. Everyone laughed at him, but he's sort of roused it, hasn't he, with them? And I think Wakey will stay up now. I mean, they've got a nice easy game at weekend, haven't they? So they'll go into against Hull, they'll go into the Cas game 2 points ahead of them in the league. And yeah.
Well, talking about clubs in crisis, if anyone wonders where Gareth Ellis is at the moment, he's on holiday. He's the assistant coach. He's been given the old heave at the end of the season. He's not too happy about it, so he's gone on holiday. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Anyway, we don't want to talk about them because we're talking about Challenge Cup finals and potentially winning Super League, and they're in the bracket with Castleford and relegation, etc. So we don't want to talk too much about them. Scott, a great stat. Only 3 teams have not been beaten by 40 points or more this season. St Helens, Catalan Dragons, and Hull Kingston Rovers. Now, a lot of people said, I wish you hadn't fucking mentioned that, because as I mentioned that, we go to Wigan on Friday, and we've named a squad that is pretty much unrecognisable to the squads we've named before. To be fair to Willie Peters, he's rolled the dice, hasn't he? He's basically nailed his colours to the mass, and he said, "Look, my first team players, I'm going to look after them. I want my strongest possible team for the Challenge Cup final," which has led to the squad for Wigan. I mean, amazingly, the squad starts at number 17. So in terms of numbers, squad numbers, it starts at 17, and that's Matty Staunton. It's almost unheard of. So Matty Staunton, Jimmy Kynehorst, Rowan Milnes, Dean Hadley, Louis Senior, Louis Johnson, Yusuf Aydin, Laula Tuhai, Fishwick, Barley, Corey Hall, Walker, youngster Lenny Ellis, another youngster Leo Tennyson, another youngster Louis Gorman, and then we've signed 3 players on loan: Cesar Rouge from Catalan, Isaac Shaw from Wakefield, Luke Thomas from Warrington. And then the squad is supplemented by Harvey Horn, Harvey Reynolds, and Owen Moore. So he's pretty much, like I said, nailed as close to the mass, hasn't he, Scott? He's protecting them players, and he's named Dean Hadley as captain. So there is still some spots up for play, because he's not rested 17 men, has he? So what do you make of the squad, and do you think Willie Peters was right to do what he's done?
I think he's earned the right, and many teams have done it in the past. Maybe a few years ago, maybe 2015 as an example, I don't think we had the luxury of resting a squad like we have now, because we just didn't have that backup and that the reserves and the academy like we've got now. I know there's a certain group of people on the other side of the river saying, well, you haven't blooded any academy or youngsters all season, so all of a sudden you're doing it now. Well, we've earned the right to do it. And these guys, young kids as they are, will, with a few experienced heads, will go out at Wigan tomorrow night, and I'm sure they'll give, Friday night, and they'll give everything that they've got in the tank. Yeah, they might come up short, and they're expected to, but it'll be a good experience for them. And they'll probably, what you don't want is a Tonkin of 70 or 80. That's what you don't want. But I think they'll probably learn more by playing Wigan at Wigan than they would playing in an academy game. They'll probably learn more about themselves as individuals as well. And if Dean Hadley and, whether any of the other senior players that have been picked up to 21 do make the 17, I don't know. They might do. 1 or 2. Well, certainly 1 or 2 will have to. Maybe they can help the young kids around the park. That'll be great. But it's a massive ask. And, the 40 points that you mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it may become 2 clubs come Friday night, I'm thinking. But it's a fantastic statement to say that it's only St Helens and Catalan and us who haven't been beaten by 40 points. I mean, those 2 teams speak volumes. To be in that 3 with them shows how far Rovers have come, doesn't it?
Yeah, and Dan, I mean, that drop goal Schneider got against Leeds to win the game, I mean, the 2 points was massive at the time, and it's even more bigger now, because it's give us a little bit of breathing space in terms of league table. I mean, we're 5th in the table on 22 points. We're 2 points behind St Helens. Of course, they've got that game in hand. We're level on point with Warrington. And then you have to go down to Salford in 7th place, so we're on 20 points. Now, they're on minus 22 goal points difference. We're on 57 plus. So it's going to take a huge result on Friday to move us down the table that far. So that 2 points just does give us just a little bit of breathing space. And that that drop goal was worth its weight in stone, I suppose. But like Scott said, Willie Peters earned the right to pick that squad. And are you firmly in the camp of all out for Challenge Cup final?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you got to wonder if at half time that was his half time team talk. Look, lads, go out there, give it everything against Cass. Go out there, give it everything. Let's win this, and you can have the week off next week. Let's target the cup. I mean, yeah, we've still got the league to play for. I don't think we're going to make the grand final. I don't think we are. Let's target the cup. It's best chance we're going to get, isn't it? I mean, Lee are invincible. Yeah, they're going well, but you watch them against Wigan the other day. They're not invincible. They're there for the taking. So, yeah, I'm in the camp of you rest. We've earned the right. We've sat nicely on 22 points. We're still pushing for the playoffs. We haven't got a bad run in, have we? The fixtures, and we're not looking down at relegation. I think we're safe now, aren't we? Mathematically.
Is that where you're still looking, Dan? Is that that's a Rovers fan in you, isn't it?
No, nobody can catch us. So let's just sit everyone in the stands. I'll let them sit at home with a nice cup of tea, relaxing. And if you look at the kids, they're not going to sort of go out there and plod along, are they? This is their the 3 debutants. It's their big moment, isn't it? They're going to be leaving everything out there. They're not playing against kids anymore. They're playing against the big boys, aren't they? Wigan away. It don't get much bigger than that for a young lad to make his debut, does it? So they'll put everything in there. I can't see it being a 60, 70 points, but we'll get a tonking. But I don't think it'll be a 60, 70 points. I think they'll leave everything out there.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit more about the 3 players who signed on loan. Cesar Rouge, he's probably the most well-known French international, played 13 times for the Catalan Dragons. He scored twice since making his Super League debut back in 2021. I mean, he's the 3rd Catalan Dragons to come on loan to the Robins this season, following the footsteps of Tanguy Zenon and 𝗕𝗓𝗄𝗓. Isaac Shaw, he was playing in France up until recently. He was playing for Villeneuve. He's just signed for Wakefield. He comes up on loan. He's supposed to be a no-nonsense prop. And then you've got Welsh international Luke Thomas from Warrington. He's featured 3 times off the bench, and he's played 1 game for the Swinton Lions this season. They're not nobodies, Scott, but obviously they're not your tried and tested Super League regulars. But then again, they give us the ability to put out a competitive side. And a lot of people have probably forgot as well, there's a reserve game that night. So Rovers are fighting on 2 fronts there. They've put a competitive squad out to play a first-team Super League game, and then they're also playing a reserve grade competition, which is credit to them for, I dare say, Lee, who forgot to put a reserve side, have been fined every single week because they've had fixtures scheduled and not been able to fulfill them. Credit to the Robins for actually going for it and putting 2 sides out and on the same night and backing up. And look, hey, it's a lottery, isn't it? The writing's on the wall for Rovers, isn't it? Wigan smarting after that semi-final defeat, named probably the strongest squad they could possibly name. They're going to want revenge. They're going to want to put a real marker down. It's a lottery. We don't know what's going to happen. But credit to Rovers, Scott, for fronting up and putting 2 squads out on the same night. And, let's see what happens.
We could have easily cancelled the reserve fixture, couldn't we?
That's what I was thinking. The same thing.
Plenty of teams, even though the fixtures have been scheduled, plenty of teams have cancelled the reserve fixture 2 or 3 days before they play it. Rovers could have said, we can't fulfil the reserve fixture. Yeah. The fact that we're throwing a team out there, it'll be made up of under 16s and under 18s, probably, the reserve team, because most of the reserves are playing for the first team. Yeah. But, the fact that they're going to front up against 2 probably formidable Wigan teams, because Wigan's kids are not mugs either. Our under 16s and our under 18s are going to be going up against Wigan's reserves. Yeah. And then our reserves, or predominantly reserves and young kids, are going up against Wigan's first team. We could have easily said, we're not playing the reserve fixture, but credit to Rovers, and these not that anybody else's opinion matters, but all these other fans saying, well, why haven't you played your young kids prior to this season instead of bringing in Zenon and Yaha? You could have played the young kids then and stuff like that. There's a time and a place for everything, and some players just aren't actually ready to play at such a young age. But sometimes your hand's forced in a game like this, in this situation, when you've got a final on the horizon next weekend. Sometimes Willie Peters' hand's been forced. He could have put a full first team out there and they might have come through unscathed. But Rovers' luck, they probably wouldn't. So he's gone, do you know what? I'm going to protect the lads that I've got for Wembley, and you lads get out there and have a go at Wigan. Fair play to him.
Yeah, Dan, it's worth pointing out that, a lot of people have been clamouring for Rovers to basically just put a full academy side out. And one of the reasons we've signed these 3 loan players is because once a player makes a first grade appearance, you have to offer them the minimum Super League contract. It's written in the rules. So minimum Super League contract is 20k a year. Now that might not sound like a lot of money, but it sounds like a lot of money to give someone for one game who might not have potentially a future at the club, which is why you can't just go handing out academy debuts to players willy-nilly, because, if you times that by 5, 6, 7, that adds up to a lot of money, which is why they've resisted the opportunity to do that. And, it shows you, though, how important that players like Lenny Ellis, Leo Tennyson, Louis Gorman are to the side, because they look to be the future going forward, and they're the reason that they're playing, because Rovers are prepared to give them the contract going forward. But, it's going to be a big step up for them, but it's going to be a great challenge for them. And let's see what they can do, because the academy's been much heralded for the work that they're doing, the players that they're producing. Don't forget as well, you've got Connor Barley, Zach Fishwick, players who potentially are closer to making a state for a claim in the first team, closer than what Leo, Lenny and Louis are. It's going to be interesting to see how they go on. But, don't forget, back end of last season when we turned over the black and whites at their ground, when we played Magic Weekend and we had Zach Fishwick, these players, sometimes it is come off the hour, come off the man, or come off the teenager more than the man.
Yeah, exactly. Fishwick was one of the mainstays in the squad for the end of last season, wasn't he? He was one of the main players. Barley had a few, didn't he? Score on his debut at St Helens. So, yeah, there's no reason why they can't. I mean, Leo Tennyson, Ian, no stranger to first teams. Has he been on loan at Cornwall a few times? Turned out for Cornwall a few times, hasn't he? I know it's a completely different level in League One. But yeah, it's I think it's a daft rule, that, isn't it? They're offering them a contract if they play one game. I think it pushes clubs to not want to play academy players, give them a chance, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, I think that rule about one game, maybe if the played 5, or there needs to be maybe more of it, because one game, it does hamper a teams, doesn't it? It hampers the whole squad.
It just does make you wonder how many of them would have actually been out there by now. Would we have played them instead of Tanguy Zenon or whatever if that wasn't the rule? And I think, to be honest, it sounds daft, but is 20k a lot of money for a professional sportsman at this?
Well, you said, didn't you? You could get 20k on the tills at Aldi, and that's no disrespect to anyone who does that job whatsoever.
No,
but what it does is just put into comparison the where the sport is, I suppose, because a lot of people on the outside look at it as a professional sport, it's a rich sport. There's lots of money in it. The reality is, rugby league's not a rich sport.
Not a rich sport. I mean, we've got that bloke on our site, lad on our site. He's what's it, 20, 22, 23. He plays for Castleford Tigers, and he turns out for cash reserves every now and then. But he says he's been offered a deal at Midlands and teams like that, and he says, I have more money being scaffolder than I would if I went to play for them. Why would I do it? I'm happy just to sit and play for Loughlean. So it just shows there's no money in the game, is there?
Yeah, Scott, I mean, when you look at the squad, though, there is still a smattering of first teamers in there. Players who you probably expect to feature in the Challenge Cup final. I mean, Matty Staunton, Jimmy Kynhorst, Roy Milnes, Dean Hadley, who's, of course, been named captain for the game, Louis Senior, Lewis Johnson, 𝗕𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓. So, you'd expect some of them to feature against Wigan in the final. The one that surprises me maybe most is Ray Milnes. I don't know if this is a clue to whether he's going to play or not, or whether Willie Peters thinks he's the right man for the job on Friday. I mean, some people have said, well, he's probably going to be the one who might miss out of there. I mean, it's very hard. I know I've had a go at picking the team, but it's very hard to try and select a side from that. What you would say is Harvey Horn, Harvey Reynolds, Owen Maul, they're the three who are definitely going to miss out. And then there's another one out of everybody else who's going to miss out. And trying to predict that is really difficult at the moment.
Yeah. It's a tough one. I mean, there is going to be a little bit of experience out there, I would have thought. Who knows? Willie might throw a curveball, and it might be that he's only named Carnos and Milnes and all them just to fulfill a 21-man squad. It might be a full 17-man lone players and kids. I can't see that, but it's possible.
Yeah, because they do need a bit of, what you would say is this is a full strength. They do need a bit of, they need something out there, don't they? Because otherwise, on the flip side, you're throwing the kids into a game where they need some experienced pros to look up to lead them round. They need that. So
yeah, if Milnes doesn't play, I presume that would mean PLT will go into the halves with Rouge. That would be the only option. So it suggests that Milnes will play. And PLT might go into fullback maybe. I don't know, but it's interesting that Jimmy's in there as well. I mean, Jimmy's probably vying for a place on the bench at Wembley. Matty Stoughton certainly is. When you look at, I know he's always been more predominantly 18th man in recent weeks, but Lewis Johnson as well. But he's never let the team down when he's played. So there is a little bit of experience in there. I think Dino's probably only playing because he's missed the last 2 weeks now, hasn't he, really? So he's only playing. He probably would have been one of the players who, if he'd have played against Cass last week, probably wouldn't have played this week. But because he's missed 2 weeks, I think he probably needs a bit of game time. And he's a good player to be, a bit of experience to lead the kids around the park a bit on Friday night.
Well, to be fair, Scott, I reckon if you said, we're going for a kickabout on his park, anyone fancy it, he'd probably be the first one to put his hand up.
No, without a doubt.
You know what I mean? He's just an absolute warrior, isn't he? And that's probably half his downfall in terms of injury as well, because he's
a brave guy. He's a brave lad. He's a bit like Minchella. He does all that dirty work in the middle of the pitch, and there's no wonder he probably gets more injuries than maybe other players do. Certainly, he's had his shoulder injuries in the past, and he's had his HIA recently. But he puts his body on the line, doesn't he? He never ever takes a backward step. And he's a great leader, certainly for the young kids who are going to be playing in that pack with him on Friday night.
Yes, Dan. What? If realistically, what are you expecting?
As long as we make a good show of it, I'm glad it's not on Sky. Put it that way. The kids.
I bet Sky are as well.
Well, they put us on last year, didn't they? When we were struggling to put a team together against Wigan, that was going to be a good Friday night watch for everybody.
We had 7 young lads last year though as well, didn't we? Who played? I think there were 7 young kids played last year, and I think we're quite game in the game right to the very end. And Charlie Kavanagh play that game as well last year. I think he did, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, if I was a neutral, they were playing in my back garden, I'd have shut the blinds. It was But I think I'd play Milnes. I think this is a game for him to sort of show that he can lead a team around the park, and he will be the leader out there. I know he's 23, and I know all the ages of the players and that, but
we send him a birthday card as well.
No, that's not November, is it? So we've got a while. Yeah, I don't know that, by the way. I was made though. Look, yeah, he's 23, but it gives him a chance to show that he can be a leader on the pitch, and he can direct the young lads around the pitch, can't he? I think it's a big game for him to step up. I don't doubt that he'll play at Wembley as well, because he seems to be working all right with Schneider, doesn't he? Milnes,
yeah, I suppose the only thing is, Dan, is the assumption is that the lineup for the final will be what it was for the semi.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee that's what it will be. So in terms of the halfback partnership, we're assuming it'll be Schneider and Milnes and Lewis all slotting at fullback. But Who knows what? We don't
If I'm
know.
honest, I think it will be the semi lineup. But as much as I feel sorry for him, I think it'll be Staunton that misses out, because I think Dean Hadley is. Willie Peters absolutely loves him, doesn't he? Loves his work ethic and everything. And I think he's the one that'll slot in. I think it'll be Staunton that misses out, unfortunately.
You think? Well, Scott, in my team, and we don't want to talk too much about the final because obviously we've got the game against Wigan and we've got a special podcast coming up next week. We've got lots of guests coming up on that. It's going to be a real special edition, that one. On my bench, Staunton missed out. I put Jimmy Kinehorst in just through his versatility. I included Hadley. You had Hadley, Kinehorst, Lytton, and the other prop was it's going to come to me now. Give me another prop's name. Who? Luckily. Yeah. So that's where Staunton misses out for me. But I mean, that's my choice. Who knows?
It's a tough one. I agree with you. Jimmy might just get the nod due to his versatility. He can slot into any of the back positions. He can slot into forward, but he can play anywhere. You know, he's even had to go prop in the past, I think, Jimmy, hasn't he? To the ball at first receiver. You know, so I think that maybe just does give Jimmy the nod. I don't know, but it would be, if Staunton does miss out, it would be so unlucky on him, I think, because I think I like Matty Staunton. I think he's a top player. Again, another player who goes all day, takes the ball up all day, defends for his life. But Jimmy might just get the nod because of his utility value, you know, and I guess that's the way of the beast, isn't it? That's rugby, you know. Willie's got to look at all options that might come up at Wembley, you know, a week on Saturday. And if you need to play to fill in a position due to an injury or, you know, a rejig of squad positions, then Jimmy's the man, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, and Dan, what you would say finally is there's lots of players in that squad for the Wigan game who won't play. You know for a fact they won't play, but there's a group of players who Willie Peters will be looking at to go, well, maybe if you could nudge me here and go, hang on, I do deserve a place in that final squad. So it's not totally done and dusted who will play in the final yet.
No, not at all. I think 90% done and dusted, isn't it? You know your backs are roughly your backs are going to be, but I think the big one is Staunton. I think this is his game. He needs to leave everything out there against Wigan, doesn't he? And I think the main reason why we've rested players is the concussion protocol, isn't it? I think if it was a week turnaround, we'd be all right, wouldn't we? But it's the fact that is it 14 days or 11 days now or something?
11, yeah.
So it's something that we had to bear in mind, isn't it? Wrap them up in bubble wrap and that. But yeah, I think Staunton is the main one, isn't he? He's the one that's got to stake his claim for a place. He's the one that's sort of been in the squad, hasn't he? While Hadley's been injured and he's been a fill-in, but he needs to. This is his moment to prove that he can be in that 17.
Yeah, well,
you don't envy Willie Peters having to sit players down and say you've been playing every week. Like something like Stark, you've been playing for the past few weeks, but unfortunately you're not playing at Wembley. You're going to be sat in the stands watching.
Yeah, and Scott, I mean, Willie Peters said this week the two things he's enjoyed the most this season was the first time he got to meet the group of players for the very first time. His second most favourite team meeting was this week when he got the opportunity to hand 3 debuts to 3 of the academy lads. No doubt one of his hardest conversations to come will be next week when he's got to tell certain players you will not be playing for Kingston Rovers in the Challenge Cup final.
I think it's every coach's worst nightmare, you know, regardless whether it's rugby, football, FA Cup final, whatever it is, to sit a player down and say, you're not playing at Wembley. It's probably one of the hardest jobs a coach has to have. You know, in a way, it's a luxury because it means we've got a decent squad to turn out for the final. But from a coach's perspective, to say to a player who has been playing regular week in, week out, you're not playing this week, mate. I won't fight. I know it's his job, but I won't swap it. I won't swap his place. You know, it's a tough job. But at the end of the day, if he's telling a player like Matty Staunton or Jimmy Kinehorst or whoever it is that you're not playing at Wembley, it means we've got a decent 17 on the pitch, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a great point to finish on. Look, we travelled to the DW Stadium in hope rather than expectation, and all I would say is we wish the boys all the best. And if you are travelling over to support the boys in Wigan, be loud and be proud. It's certainly going to be an interesting game of rugby league. And of course, next week we've got a very special podcast as we build up to the Challenge Cup final. How exciting does that sound? Lots of special guests coming on, so it's going to be one to tune into. But for now, this is the Red Robin podcast, which is powered by Budget Tires Auto Centre. And for now, just live, love, laugh, and be happy.